computer. There we go. And I'll share. Okay. 上去不也就见面到他，瑞拉林金年的根本的，上个行动没得，我给要多过南大金啊，就把说，一人个人那么的拉干的呀的呀咪。上一周到手机就拿嘛，将就把都打你家出去，大概学学个别是能给多了，别去上也都把手。So, anybody want to ask anything from last time or say anything? As I say, we got into kind of
Yeah.
the hard part of the teachings.
Wilson,
Yeah.
I wasn't able to attend the last meeting. Is there a video link of it or a way to get the recording?
Yeah, on YouTube we have a channel. It's small case MSTCWDC. And if you look at did you get the email invitation for the class?
I did, but I'm sure it's buried in my email, but I will look for it.
It's in there. The link to the YouTube page is there.
Okay.
So that's why we're recording these is because, you know, not everybody can always be here. And so that way you can check between and catch up. But I'll review it just a little bit so that you hear where we are. Because early on, hi, Bobby. Early on, Bobby with a Y had asked about a formal refuge procedure. And don't worry, you're not trapped. You're not going to have to take refuge today if you don't want to. But I thought that I'd give a little bit of a backdrop for what it is, and that if you want to, you're certainly welcome to. And if not, don't worry. Um,
Thank you.
but Bobby with a Y had asked, is there any safety in Buddhism? Because when you hear, the Buddhist view of what life is and how it throws us around against our will, helplessly in and out of different lifetimes, it can feel like hopeless when you first hear it. And so the Buddha did offer some assurances, but it's a little different. After the class last time, do you mind if I mention our
Oh,
conversation?
yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Bobby, who had been raised in a Christian faith, and I was raised Christian too. I was raised in an Episcopal faith, and I never abandoned my Christian faith. Um, in other words, I see Jesus as a great bodhisattva from a Buddhist point of view. But I did abandon some of the viewpoints that I was taught because they didn't make sense to me. Like when I came of age, and I was about 11 or 12, and I realized how horrible the world was. And then I heard the line at church, well, God is good, God knows everything, God's all powerful, and so everything is for a purpose. And I kind of scratched my head. So why did God choose that kid to be killed or that war to happen and all those people to be blown to bits? And so it didn't make reasonable sense to me. And of course, the assurances that I got, well, just have faith, don't question. That didn't make sense to me either, because I had kind of a scientific mind. Um, and so I figured that none of that really was true. That's my conclusion that I came to. However, as I got to be late into my teenage years and I started experiencing some other things, I started changing my mind. But what made sense to me was the Buddhist view. I think the reason people find it hard to hear about the first truth of suffering is that it is scary and it's not what you want to think about. But the Buddhist um, thought is that it's going to be there. That's how it's been for us. That's going to be how it will be unless we do something about it. As Lama Yeshe once said, it's not like suddenly the Spirit of Christ is just going to whoosh, descend upon you, and then all your problems are gone forever, although that's what we're taught to believe. Um, there's some stuff in the mechanisms at the deep level of our mind that we've got to clean up. The Buddha said, the last thing he said as he was passing is he said, be a lamp unto yourself, which means that we have, and he added to that, work out your own salvation. And it's because really we have to be our own doctors and we have to clean up the cause for our suffering. The Buddha said, I can't take away your suffering like removing a thorn. I can't clean away your negativities like with soap and water. All the Buddhas can do is appear and teach and guide. And so that's the extent of what, from their side, they're able to do. There is a blessing current that comes with anybody here who's been around a really well practiced teacher will have felt it before. In the presence of somebody who's really deeply purified and developed their mind, you just feel better when you're around them. And you're not quite sure why, but it's something in the ethos, if you will, that they are able to manifest. And so there is a sense of blessings. Um, but I remember one friend of mine who became an evangelical kind of Christian, and I was mentioning this to Bobby, and after the last class, he spent one party telling me his point of view, and his stick was it's not through our deeds that we become liberated or that we enter heaven. It's through the grace of God. And so he kind of was drilling this into my mind because he knew I was Buddhist. And I just listened patiently, although I didn't buy it. But we can see that happening in our news media, where you get these people who seem like they're very devoted, but they're doing horrible things to people. And there's some sense that at the last minute I can say, oh, sorry about all those people I killed or all those people I stole from, and somehow they'll enter the kingdom of heaven. I don't think so. As a Buddhist, I don't think that's how it works. I do think that karma is true. And I think that what happens is when we die, the strongest karma is going to define what we become, and we're going to go from there. And it's been happening. That's been our course through countless lifetimes. And until we get a hold of that process and um, untangle it for ourselves, we're going to be caught up in the muck. So when you decide to go for refuge, there's a formula before it where the teacher says, up until this time, all your births have been suffering births. All of your companions have been suffering's companions. And that's to get us in that mindset of, I've got to find something else. I've got to find some other direction that's going to lead me to something better than just constant suffering. And so that's where the teachings on refuge come. Um, And so I thought I'd start there. Um, I'll tell you some of the promises from the Buddha, and you can you can decide if you think they're true or not. But these don't come from me. One sense of certainty, one way to find certainty when you're feeling afraid because of the situation that we're in, as I said, is finding a real spiritual guide. And you have to hunt for them. And in the first class, I talked about the 10 qualities that Maitreya Buddha suggested you look for when you're looking for a spiritual guide. But what I didn't say is what the advantages are for finding one, because they're in the scriptures, um, their list of your advantages if you find a spiritual guide. And if you start to actually follow them and listen to them, one advantage, you'll be closer to Buddhahood. You'll please all the enlightened ones because their main goal is to liberate us. And so if you find a guide, a true guide, and you're following them, they're like, oh, good. My kid's doing okay. Um, Negative forces, negative companions won't be able to harm you. And that's interesting. So a lot of people, when they're fearing some kind of demonic force in Buddhism, they'll take refuge. And the sense is there's some protection there that comes through that refuge. Um, your mental afflictions will start to get less the more you go for refuge. You'll see them over time. It takes a long time and it takes a lot of work, but you'll see them get less.
That's definitely true. Like,
You've noticed it?
I know how I was about a year and a half ago versus how I am now. And I mean, it's just anecdotal, I guess. It's just me. Um, I used to get angry very easily, never violent or anything like that. I wasn't like attacking people, but um, I would get really impatient, really upset over the smallest little things.
Mhm.
And like, it's not been like that ever since I started daily, even though a lot of my practice is contrived because I'm still disciplining myself and getting acquainted with and stuff like that, you know. Um, but like just yesterday, I spilled an entire cup of hot coffee in my lap. In my lap.
Ouch.
It went all over my keyboard. It went all over my little game controller because I was playing a game. Destroyed those things. By the way, hot coffee in my lap. So,
Hmm.
and my reaction was, oh, that's
Ouch.
unfortunate.
Yeah.
I didn't even drop any bombs. So,
Yeah. That just happened.
yeah, I think I really do attribute that to the mindfulness because, you know, when you do those mindfulness practices, you know, constantly coming back and then examining thoughts and things like that, when that, like in my case, the anger shows up real quick, I go, whoa. And I look, you know, I'm like, okay, let's,
For me, it happened when I met Sarah Rinpoche. My mind was in a terrible place. I had just been broken up. A very deep relationship broke, and I was suicidal, and I was in extreme psychic pain. And so I didn't want to live at all. But I had heard something about Buddhism, and so I believed that there is rebirth and karma. And I thought if I act on this, I will end up in a worse place. So I was holding myself back. And I met Serme Rinpoche, and he was teaching Ganden Lagima. It's a very beautiful yogic practice. And I suddenly just had this peace. And the suicidality never came back. But every time I would practice, I would feel that peace come back. And so that was for me a clear sign of, yes, this is a good
it
thing to
works.
do. It works. Um, so I just, I'm sure each of you have your own reasons for being here, and probably similar things. Um, But that's one of the promises that your afflictions will get less, your realizations on the path will grow. And here's an assurance that's nice. You will never lack a spiritual guide through all your future lives. If you do well, with the ones you meet now, you'll keep meeting them. Um, you won't fall into lower states when you die, and you'll achieve every temporary and ultimate benefit. So does that reassure at all? It's not like suddenly all your problems are gone, but the sense is that you start to be on a safe path once you connect with the true spiritual guide. There are terrible disadvantages if you're abusing a spiritual guide. I don't know if I want to read them to you because they're too scary. um, but if you don't have a spiritual guide, of course, you don't get all those advantages. And if you do, then you do get all those advantages. Um, but there are also benefits. I mentioned last time bodhicitta, that mind where you not only want your own spiritual benefit, but you want to become enlightened to help all beings and bring them from suffering. So I thought I'd read you the benefits of refuge and then the benefits of bodhicitta as they're written in the scriptures. So there are 8 benefits um, that are taught in Buddhism for taking refuge. We will become a Buddhist. There are 2 ways to become a Buddhist. One is through your faith, and then another is through how you think about things. Um, with the first one, when you start to have some sense of faith in the Buddha, in the teachings of the Buddha, and in the Sangha, those who are following the teachings, then that constitutes the first way to become a Buddhist. A second way to become a Buddhist is when you see that all compound things are impermanent, that all things that are contaminated by mental afflictions and negative karma are the nature of suffering, and that all things lack independent nature because everything's dependently arisen, and that only nirvana is peace. That's nirvana is the extinguishing of the mental afflictions. And so that's peace. When you start to think that way, then philosophically you're a Buddhist. Um, so anyway, by taking refuge, you become a Buddhist. Taking refuge is also the foundation for taking all the vows that are available in Buddhism. There are 3 levels of morality in Buddhism. The first level is called pratimoksha, individual liberation vows. And those are the 5 precepts of a layperson: not to kill, not to steal, not to lie, not to have sexual misconduct, and not to become intoxicated. And so those are the basic 5, and those are taught for your own well-being. Because if you break those, then you're creating causes for really incredible suffering. For instance, we talked about karma last time. The karma for taking a life is to, um, in your next life, enter into one of the lower realms of existence where the suffering is brutal. Then, if you ever get back into a human realm, then it's said because of that karma of taking life, you're born into a really negative circumstance, really harsh conditions, and that your life will be shortened because of having taken life, and that you'll have a tendency to think it's okay to take life. So that's why I'm saying when I see these people saying they're Christian and then using that doctrine to promote really terrible warfare, I'm like, I don't think it's going to end well. I just don't. based on just that one teaching on the karma of taking life. So anyway, those precepts are there for us. The lay people vows, as I said, they're the five precepts of a lay person. There's also a single day vow you can take. There's higher vows of a novice monk or nun. Then there are more intricate vows for a fully ordained monk or nun. I mean, they have hundreds of vows, but they boil down to almost to those five precepts, to four major things. Um, Not to take life, not to lie, not to steal, not to enter into sexual misconduct. And so all the vows for those monks and nuns, it's like if you think of concentric circles, like the innermost hub is don't do those four things, right? And then outside that, there are protections like vows that kind of insulate them from ever violating one of those more potent negative karmas. And so, as I said, they have hundreds of vows. Um, so anyway, that's the first level of morality, and they're called for individual liberation because just by following those vows, you become liberated from samsara over time. A higher level than that are the bodhisattva vows. That's when you realize I'm not the only one suffering here. All beings are in this situation, and you develop that um, full blown compassion for all beings with the intent to become enlightened. And within that level of morality, there are 18 root vows and 46 branch vows. But we won't go into all those right now. Um, on that path, the Bodhisattva path, it can take various lengths of time to become fully enlightened, depending on your how much virtue you have, what kind of practices you do, how diligent you are. Um, but I gotta say, you get this sense when you enter that level of practice that this is a big deal, and this isn't a single lifetime pursuit. That this is something that's been a potential there um, forever, and it will continue to be one, and that you're on a journey where not only are you taking care of yourself, but you're taking care of all life. And so the vows of the Bodhisattva keep you on that path. And it's a very beautiful path. As the Dalai Lama says, you go from bliss to bliss when you enter that path. And so even though it's a long path to enlightenment, um, it's okay because it's a blissful path. It's a joyous path. And then if you get the sense, though, okay, this is okay for me, I can take as long as it takes, and that's fine with me. But it's not so great if I tarry and I let people suffer and let beings go through these terrible situations and they're in when I could go quicker and give them relief sooner. And based on that point of view of the sense of urgency that you want to be able to help as quickly as you can, then there are what are called Vajrayana vows, the diamond vehicle vows. And that's a whole other level of morality. They all intersect and they all work with each other, but all of them become possible if you take refuge. Without refuge is the basis of all those levels of morality. If you don't take refuge, then you don't have the basis for entering those levels of moral practice. Um, Taking refuge removes lots of bad karma. Just that act of taking refuge and many, many lifetimes of bad karma gets purified. And that's maybe where the Christian thought of when you have faith, it removes your bad deeds.
Is that like a baptism
A little bit like
where
that.
all your original sin is washed away and
Um, there's certainly that hope, right? It's good to keep that hope. Whether that actually happens, you know what I mean? Because we've been cycling in existence from a Buddhist point of view beginninglessly, and so our store of negativity is quite, I don't know. If I become enlightened, I'll tell you.
is that concept based in sutra or is that based in like Tibetan tradition?
It's sutra.
Okay.
There's a sense that this is in sutra text. It would probably be Mahayana sutras.
Probably. Yeah.
Um, and so I know there's some sense of that in Theravada Buddhism, but if it's exactly the same or not, I don't know.
Listen, if I remember well, you remove the innate ignorance only at the 7 or 8 bhumi, which is a subdivision of the path of meditation. It's a long path, and at the beginning you remove afflictions, but the innate, the structural ignorance, the original sin, the Christian would say, get removed only deep down there toward the 7 or 8 path, I think, when
So
7 or 8 bhumi, when you 3 more bhumis and then you are in the path of no more sin. That's what they say. Yeah.
So Nietzsche's making the point. In Buddhism, there's a sense of innate ignorance um, and learned ignorance. Learned ignorance is when we get taught something during this life that makes us think in a way that's not accurate about the self and about reality. Innate ignorance we're born with. And if you want to take that Christian idea of original sin is wiped out, if you want to equate that with the Buddhist concept of primordial ignorance or innate ignorance, then from a Buddhist point, that innate ignorance doesn't get wiped out until the seventh or eighth bhumi on the Bodhisattva path with a lot of purification. In fact, when that gets wiped out, um, you become an arhat, a foe destroyer, and you've basically attained nirvana when that gets totally wiped out. So if it were true that baptism wipes out that, then everybody who's ever baptized should be living in nirvana. I got baptized. I'm not in nirvana. So therefore,
I'll worth the shot.
I have reason to question whether it gets rid of that level of our problem. But again, that's equating Buddhist ideas with Christian, and how equatable are they?
Sorry to interfere, but there was a logician, Bertrand Russell, right? Very famous logician, was a master of Wittgenstein. And so a mind that is incredible, a philosophical mind. And he said, he wrote a book, Why I'm Not a Christian. And he's mentioning exactly what you were saying before. He said from the beginning of the book, I cannot be a Christian thinking that God creates all this evil that is in the world. It doesn't make any sense. It's completely illogical. Just to confirm what you were saying before.
Yeah, if you read philosophical studies in the area of religious debate, that is the primary argument that is drawn against a theistic view of the universe. If God is good, God's all knowing, God's all powerful, why the hell is he doing this to us?
Well, and of course, the easy path out of that argument is mysterious ways,
Mysterious way.
and that's a little hard to swallow.
And then to come back to that, what if God were one of us? That song, schlepping his way to heaven. So anyway, this is why Tibetans debate all the time. They
Um,
bring up stuff.
Wilson, I just have
Yeah.
one comment.
Hmm.
Um, when you go for refuge or whatever, I actually had a really big experience. Wasn't a boomy by any stretch of the imagination, but I would hate to diminish even doing refuge because it really did, it pushed me forward to practice Buddhism. So a really, a, I had a really big experience that came out of it. So I wouldn't want to diminish just doing refuge. It's not just doing refuge. It's like opening the door and there it is, you know. So that's
I,
all I wanted to say.
I think that's perfect because I experienced something similar, as I said, when I met Sarah Rinpoche. And I'm glad you did as well. And I hope other people have experienced that at some point. I remember we had some people coming by for a while who their refuge, if you will, is they saw some Tibetan monks doing a sand mandala painting. They were doing the sand mandala rubbing and developing, I think it was Medicine Buddha at the Smithsonian, and they just had this energy thing that they experienced, and that was enough to make them want to learn more about
Me personally, because of what happens to me, I'm a big believer in visuals. That's all I have to say. You know, it's
in what?
visuals, you know,
Yeah,
what
visuals.
they did, what they can accomplish. That's all.
Yeah. And there is a visual component in refuge that I'll go into in a minute. But okay. So it removes bad karma. You accumulate great merit by going for refuge. It's like calling up in a way all of your past lives' goodness, if you will, that you're kind of back on track. You've been wandering and you didn't know where you were, and then suddenly you feel like, oh, okay, I'm back. I'm back on track. You'll be protected from harm. You'll avoid falling into lower states. You will achieve all of your goals, and eventually you'll attain Buddhahood. And so this is why whenever you see the Dalai Lama teach somewhere, he always starts out with refuge. And um, that's what you'll see when you visit any Buddhist temple. It always starts with refuge. It's kind of home base. So on top of refuge, if you want to even create greater virtue, then your motive for refuge, if you can generate that wish to become enlightened, to help all beings, so that at some point you'll be able to guide all beings out of suffering and establish them into some permanent form of well-being, then if you add that bodhicitta, you get 10 benefits according to Buddhist scripture. It's the only entrance to the Mahayana path, the great path of Buddhism. Buddhas and bodhisattvas will think of you as their son or their daughter. It's like you're in the same family with them. And they'll kind of, oh, when they notice that somebody has that attitude, then when they cherish all beings, you're like family. And so they'll even go further out of the way to look after you. You suppress all the listeners and solitary realizers in your motive. So somebody who's on the path just for their own nirvana, well, it's very beautiful and it's very much a path of Buddhism. You surpass that just by that wish to liberate all beings. It's a much bigger wish. You will become the highest object worthy of honor. So, in other words, when you're carrying that mind, any being who creates good karma with you, it helps them exponentially because that you have that attitude and they're connecting to you in a good way. You easily accumulate great merit moment by moment. It's vast accumulation of merit. You remove bad karma and mental obscurations. You easily achieve all the goals you want, similar to refuge, but this is even more potent. You cannot be harmed by negative forces, negative spirit harm, and that kind of thing, and other obstacles. You will completely complete all the levels and paths. and you eventually become a field that produces every happiness for sentient beings. So those are the promises. Did that give any more surety? Are you still feeling like there's no hope? So hopefully this does give you a sense of hope. Um, hmm. So those of you who want, if
Christian,
you're
can you
interested,
repeat the 10th point and the first one? I missed the first point and the last one. The benefit of a bodhicitta. I couldn't write it down.
okay. You enter the Mahayana, the great vehicle.
Okay.
Um, so with refuge, you enter the path of Buddhism. With bodhicitta, you enter the path of bodhisattvas. Without bodhicitta, there's no bodhisattva. The definition of a bodhisattva is somebody who has that mind that's intent on enlightenment. Okay, so the main two ingredients for taking refuge, one is fear, right?
We covered that.
Right? We covered fear, which is you are here, and when you contemplate it deeply, if you're not afraid, then your mind must be either enlightened or made out of stone, because it's a pretty frightening realization.
Wilson, is there a practice where you what do you contemplate the 13 like chain or whatever they call it?
The
Like
12 link.
yeah, the 12 link. Is there not a practice to do
Oh,
that?
yes. Yeah, the 12 nidanas. There are lots of practices where you do that. In
Mhm.
fact, when Buddha taught the 12 nidanas, he would start with the first link and then to the second, third, fourth. And then he would start from the 12th link backwards. And then he would talk about if you eliminate that first link of ignorance, then how it breaks down that chain of interdependent arising. So
Okay.
I'm not going to go into that now
No, no,
because
no. That's it's a big one because I joined somebody else's thing, which it was our lineage, but it was more in the middle of that. And it was very, and how he taught, it was like, how do you perceive it? What, and all that was very involved. And I knew I was in the middle of it. I always have to start at the beginning. So I didn't continue.
well, eventually, those are part of the teachings for a middle level being, um, somebody who wants nirvana and wants to get to nirvana. You have to understand how samsara works, and part of it is understanding those links of how karma evolves from a initial impulse or action into something that actually defines what we become. And it's a process. It takes at least two lifetimes, if not more, for a single karmic impulse to give a ultimate result like that.
Well, maybe another time we could do a class on that would be great.
Sure. Um, all right. So I'll tell you one story about refuge that our teacher, Sarme Khyentse Rinpoche, used to like to tell us. His teacher, Babanka Rinpoche, said, just saying the words, I go for refuge, is like looking at a cave in a rainstorm and saying, cave, cave. In other words, if you're just verbalizing it and your affect is not in line, then you're kind of stuck in the rainstorm of existence. And to actually get the shelter of the cave, you have to go in. And so one part of it, as I said, is having fear of continued unenlightened existence. And the other part is some sense of trust. So if you're in the middle of an ocean and drowning, and somebody next to you is drowning, but somebody else has grabbed onto a piece of wood and is floating, which person are you going to go to for help, right? Obviously, the person who's floating. So, in the cycle of existence, somebody who's reached the state that Nietzsche was talking about, where they've wiped out their innate egotism and the afflictions that come from it, is considered like ultimate sangha, somebody that you can really count on because they're not going to fall back. They've emancipated themselves from that cycle of existence, and nothing can harm them really. And so that's irreversible. That's an irreversible stage. There are several stages before that that are called irreversible. How irreversible they are can be questioned, right? But the beginning of irreversibility comes when your bodhicitta and your refuge become stable. When that's really firm, then there's every chance that you're not going to fall into a bad state. And so, to the extent that you're able um, to have some kind of trust for those kinds of beings, the ultimate um, state that we're going for is Buddhahood. And so that's why the first refuge is the Buddha. Anybody, and what is a Buddha? That's somebody who's eliminated their afflictions and they've eliminated obstacles to knowledge. And so such a being can see everything all at once. And they know your level, they know what you need, they have the ability to appear, they have the ability to teach and guide, and in their mind they have true cessations. True cessations means they've eliminated things that cause suffering, and those things are not coming back. They've wiped them out completely from their continuum. So that's the ultimate refuge. However, um, the refuge that helps us the most is Dharma. It's what those beings say to guide us. And those volumes behind me are an example of what's called scriptural Dharma. Those are based on enlightened beings who have written or talked about the path, and you can count on them, because they have that vantage point. They're coming from an enlightened state or nearby enlightened state. However, that's still a relative refuge. It's called relative because it's not absolute protection. The absolute protection is called Tokicha, realizational Dharma. That's where a practitioner in their own mind, when they start to get real progress and they see their afflictions for what they are, and they learn how to meditate and they learn how to understand reality, and they can see through the false states of egotism, and they're able to uproot those afflictions until they destroy them, and those afflictions aren't coming back, right? That's called a true cessation in their mind. That kind of Dharma is total security. If you can find that inner Dharma of cessation, that's a very high state on the path when you're able to wipe out your own afflictions, right? Meanwhile, at a relative level, we're practicing that relative Dharma if we avoid the 10 non-virtues, for example. Just that part is the path of abandonment at a relative level. What are the 10 non-virtues? Killing, sexual misconduct, stealing, those are three of body. Lying, abuse of speech, divisive speech, gossip, those are four by speech. And then malice, desire, and wrong views. Those are three by mind. And those three by mind, those are the ones you really got to get rid of. Um, so anyway, just abandoning those 10 non-virtues is practicing the path of Dharma and abandonment, if you will. So Dharma is the ultimate refuge in that way. That's what really makes us secure. And then Sangha, as I mentioned, are beings on the path that will help us, like monks, nuns, friends in the Dharma who kind of encourage you and help you along. So when you go for refuge, formally, um, it's good to develop that fear, that trust in the three jewels. They're called the three rare gems because they're more precious than anything that you can find in the world. And when you go for refuge to them, you're incredibly rich from a spiritual point of view. So those two things, fear and trust, in addition, bodhicitta. If you can do that with bodhicitta, that you're going for refuge for the sake of all beings, then for a moment, um, just imagine in front of you all of your teachers in the form of the Buddha. There's an image of the Buddha behind me. His right hand um, is on his knee, touching the cushion. And that shows his overcoming of Mara. Remember on the seat of enlightenment when Mara opposes him, and then he touches the cushion, and Mara becomes powerless to overcome him. And so that's through loving kindness and the power of his concentration and wisdom. He overcame Mara. So that also shows his relative methods for bodhisattva activities. And you'll see in his left hand, he's holding a begging bowl that's filled with nectar. That nectar has three qualities to it. It represents wisdom, but the three qualities are it's a medicinal nectar capable of relieving any illness. It's a deathless elixir that can give you deathlessness. And it's a completely pure nectar that removes all hindrances of any hindering forces. And so he's holding that elixir in his left hand, showing the path of wisdom. You imagine that his body color is a beautiful golden hue made out of light, and that he's smiling at you with complete understanding and compassion. And around him are myriad enlightened beings emanating from him. So you imagine your mom on your left, next to you, your dad on your right. Imagine all your friends behind you, all in the form of human, whether alive or not. You imagine any foes you may have, any people causing you problem kind of below and in front of you, between you and the objects of refuge. And all sentient beings in human form stretching out as far as your mind can imagine on even ground, very even, soft, flexible ground, and that you're leading them into refuge. And so the formula, I'll say the Tibetan because this is from the Vinaya. Serme Rinpoche taught me this near the end of his life. So, and so he did say I should give it. So I did get permission to do this. I can't say that. Don't think of that you're getting refuge from me. Think that you're getting refuge straight from the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha that you visualized in front of you. So the first, I'm just going to say what the Tibetan is. I'll recite it in Tibetan, and then you recite it back. And we'll do that 3 times. And then the third time, imagine that you've received refuge. So first I'll tell you what the words mean. Um, the Tibetan word dak means me. Shegi, Shegiwa means so-called. And instead of repeating that part back, you say your name. So I Wilson, or I Bobby, or I Icha, or Deborah, or Karen, whatever your name is, Sharon. So Doc, and then your name. Undine means from this time on. Sum, um, holding from now on. Jisi, until. So Badu, as long as I live. Jisi so Bardu means as long as I live. So this vow that you're taking isn't until enlightenment, though you can think that way, but at least as long as I live. Kamni Namgi um, means among, Kangni means two-legged, Namgi means plural. Um, so among the two-legged beings, um, Chuk means supreme, the supreme one among two-legged beings. Sangye, who is that? That's the Buddha. Sangye means the Buddha. La to you. Gyabzu Chio, I'm going to you for refuge. And again, that's like going out of the storm into refuge and safety. So that's refuge in the Buddha. Then the next is to the Dharma. Duchakdandrawa Namgi, those who have freed themselves from desire. Kichok Chula, the supreme Dharma, La to that. Katsuchio, I go for refuge to that Dharma. So by freedom, that which is completely free of desire, the supreme Dharma, it's not only free from desire, it's free from all afflictions. So you can imagine that, and that's, again, there's scriptural Dharma that shows you the path to get there, and there's realizational Dharma, which is being there in a state completely free of the afflictions. Gyabsuchio. And then to the Sangha, Sognamgi, the assembly. Chok means supreme assembly. Gyandun La, Gyandun is monks, but it's Sangha, to the Sangha. At a relative level, a group of monks is called Sangha. At an ultimate level, any bodhisattva who's reached the path of seeing or beyond is ultimate Sangha. Gyandun La, to the Sangha, Kabsu Chio, I go for refuge. And then it ends, Dak, Jishi Sar Bardu, Dak means I, Jishi So Bardu, as long as I live, Gabsun, the three jewels of refuge, the three refuges, Zimbe I will hold them as my refuge. Genyandu, um, Genyan is a layperson, as a layperson. Sumbar Sundusul, I request you, please hold me in your care. So Sumba is the venerable ones that you've imagined in front of you. And Sundusul means I'm requesting you, please hold me in your care. All right, so you get a sense of what you're going to say? Okay.
Sense.
All right. So I'll repeat it, and then just if you want to take refuge, repeat it back. If not, you can just listen and go on after.
Do
After.
you have a copy for the screen or no?
No, I do not. I should have thought of that. I'm so sorry.
Because I'm not that good at speaking Tibetan. If it's long and I hear it,
Well, I'll break it up into bite-sized parts.
okay, that's fair.
Okay, sorry. I should have thought of that. Okay. Doc Shigiwa. So say your name, Doc.
Bobby,
Undine
Undine,
Sunde.
Sunde,
Jisi So Bardu.
Jisi Sobaru,
Kanyi Namgi.
Kani Nagi,
Chok.
Chok,
Sangyela.
Sangela,
Gyabsuchio.
Gyapsuchio,
Duchakdang.
Duchakdang,
Dawa Namgi.
Dawa Namgi,
Chok Chula.
Chokchula,
Gyabsuchio.
Gyapsuchio,
Sok Namgi Chok.
Soknamgi Chok,
Gedunla.
Gedunla,
Gyabsuchio.
Gyapsuchio,
Dak Jisi.
Jisi,
So Bardu.
Sobardu,
Gabsun. Gabsun.
Kapsum,
Zimbe.
Zembe,
Genyandu.
Genyendu,
Tsumbe.
Sumbe,
Sungdusul.
Sungdusu,
Okay, you did the first repetition. Now we'll do the second. Tak Shegiwe.
Da Bami,
Dundine.
Dundine,
Sungde.
Sumde,
Shisi So Bardu.
Jisi Sobardu,
Ganyi Namgi.
Gangi Namgi,
Chok Sangyela.
Chok Sangela,
Gyabsuchio.
Gyapsuchio,
Duchakdan Dawa Nam. Duchakdan
Duchakdang,
Dawa Nam.
Yawanam,
Gichok.
Gicho,
Chula.
Shula,
Gyabsuchio.
Gyapsuchio,
Sok Namgi.
Sognangi,
Chok.
Chok,
Gendunla.
Gendunla,
Gyabsuchio.
Gyapsuchio,
Dak Jisi.
Tak Jisi,
So Bardu.
Sobardu,
Gabsum Zimbe.
Gyapsu Sembe,
Genyandu.
Genyendu,
Tsumbe.
Sumbe,
Sundusul.
Sundusu,
So on the third time when we reach that last part, imagine that you get the actual refuge from the assembled Buddha Dharma Sangha in front of you. Da.
Should we be in that kneeling position?
You can if you want. At my age, I wouldn't even try.
Okay.
But if you want, there is like special posture if you want. Rinpoche, Seramekin Rinpoche used to call it the chicken posture. You just sit with one leg tucked and one knee up, and then your hands over your knee like that. So if you want to and you can, then you can do that. But if not, it's fine to just sit comfortably. Da Shegiwa,
Da Babi,
Dudine,
Dudine,
Sungde,
Sunde,
Jishi So Bardu,
Jiji Sobardu,
Kangi Namgi,
Gangi Namgi,
Chok,
Chok,
Sangyela,
Sangela,
Gyabsuchio,
Gyapsuchio,
Duchak Dan Dawa Nam, or Duchak
Duchak,
Dan Dawa
Dangawan,
Namgi,
Namgi,
Chok Chula,
Chokchula,
Gyabsuchio,
Gyapsuchio,
So Namgi,
Sonamgi,
Chok,
Chok,
Gendunla,
Gendunla,
Gyabsuchio,
Gyapsuchio,
Da
Da Babi,
Jisi So Bardu,
Jisi Sobardu,
Gyabsum Zimbe,
Gyapsu Sembe,
Genyandu,
Genyendu,
Tsumbe,
Sumbe,
Sundusu.
Sundusu,
And imagine that the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha take you in as their child and agree to look after you. So that's a formal ceremony. It's straight from the Vinaya scriptures. And again, um, there's an unbroken lineage of that. So you now have it. So how to preserve refuge? Do you mind if I spend some time on that since we did the refuge ceremony? Um, in the Compendium of Determination that was written by a Sangha, To keep your refuge in your heart, rely on excellent persons, true teachers, good companions. Listen to the sublime teachings and fix your attention on them. Do not excite your sensory faculties. It's like most worldly people spend all their time on entertainment, right? It's not that you have to cut off all entertainment, but that shouldn't be your main focus, to not constantly just waste your time that way.
Is this why monastics avoid music?
Yeah, yeah. I used to be a musician, so this was a hard one for me. And when I first got interested in Buddhism, I talked to Lama Yeshe about it. And I said, is it okay if I still play music and compose music? He said, oh, yes, you can sing praise to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. And he noticed my expression fall, because I was really into really interesting compositions of music. That was not in my wheelhouse. And then he saw my expression and he said, or you can compose something that makes people think, oh, where did that come from? And so he totally nailed it. So it doesn't mean you can't enjoy things like that or compose beautiful things. But again, this is more getting at people become kind of entertainment holics and just looking for one new thrill after another. And that's gonna take you further away from the path if you do that. Um, so take up the precepts correctly, be compassionate to sentient beings, and strive to make daily offerings to the three jewels. And so you'll notice that whenever you're around a Buddhist teacher and they're eating, they'll pause or they'll say a prayer. And that's offering the first portion of their food to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha before they partake of it. And so that's an example of offering to the Buddhas. If you have a shrine, you can set out water bowls and do your meditations that way. So, according to oral tradition, there are three things that you should not do. These are called proscriptive things that you shouldn't do, that could weaken your refuge or take you away from it. Do not go to worldly deities for refuge. So, what's a worldly deity? There are some very powerful spiritual forces that are still stuck in samsara. And in Buddhism, sometimes those forces are invoked for different purposes, but not for refuge. And so your refuge should only be in beings that are either fully enlightened or on the path to enlightenment and to the Dharma that teaches you how to go there. So if you get kind of sidelined into worshiping some powerful force that's malevolent, then that's unfortunate.
Wilson, I have a question. Not that I would do this, but
Yeah.
uh, is is that also not like very charismatic people that people get like caught up in them and what they say and what they think, and this is the way to go?
So like if you're into crypto and you build a golden
Yeah,
statue,
something like that. But also there's been others which, I
I,
don't
I, I would say,
find. Go ahead.
well, I would say that would be very adverse to your reputation. You let somebody like that control you and you came under their sway. Um, some really enlightened teachers are very charismatic, but you really have to be careful not just going for charisma itself, right? Because some people can get temporary power or some kind of city or something like that, but not really be trustworthy on the path. So you have to be discerning. Did that answer the question?
Sorta. I mean, it can also they can also be like Buddhists, as you say, but I'm talking about people outside of Buddhism that, they're really charismatic, and if they follow them long enough, they found out they lied about their beginnings, and then, those kind of people too, right? I mean,
Right. That's how you make a cult.
yeah, you don't start reading about them and going, oh, look how, you don't
Right.
spend your time on them at all, right?
And basically, anybody who's still in samsara, who's caught up in the eight worldly dharmas, and they may be charismatic, and you may find them attractive, or that you want to be somehow part of their group.
Well, and sometimes they say things that actually make sense and are good. And lots of times they're not practicing it anyway, but
Well, one thing, and I say this both as a therapist, but I've also heard it from Buddhist teachers, to listen to what people say, but more importantly, watch what they do, right? And so in therapy, we call that the content, which is what people say, and then the process is what they actually do.
my grandmother used to say that, so that's sort of ingrained in me anyway.
And so if they're saying one thing and doing another, then automatically, whether they're saying Buddhist stuff or not, I would stay clear of that individual, right? But certainly if they're saying stuff that is enticing you more into worldly activity, I would say, don't have time. Life is short. All right, so avoiding worldly deities or charismatic. In fact, there's a prayer that Tsongkhapa wrote, the prayer for the virtuous beginning, middle, and end. And one of his prayers is explicitly, in all my future lives, may I never come under the influence of negative teachers who take me away from the Dharma, right? And so that's a prayer that Tsongkhapa wrote. And I think that's a good one to keep in our minds. Um, all right, so that's one of the things to avoid. Another one to avoid is abandon harm and malice towards living beings. And that's really important in these politically contentious times because it's easy to get polarized and wish harm to one's political enemies. And so to try to avoid that. Um, don't befriend or agree with those who lack faith and repudiate the three jewels. So Stermate Rinpoche used to say this, if you have refuge really in your heart, then you shouldn't abandon it even in a joke. Um, and he said that if you really think about it deeply, he said, get yourself a cup of tea and think about this sometime. If somebody threatened you with death and said, either you abandon your refuge or I'm going to kill you, so it's a choice between your life or refuge, which one would you choose? And so his logic was if you abandon your life, that's only this life you lost. But if you abandon refuge, that's safety through all your future lives. And so anyway, so the sense is
What
not
was the second point, Wilson, please? What was it?
if you abandon refuge, that's abandoning your well-being for all your future lives.
No, the second point,
Oh, I'm
the
sorry.
two things.
Abandon harm and malice towards living beings. Um, so those are proscriptive things not to do to keep your refuge. There are three things that are prescriptive. Those are things you should do, right? So take this medicine, right? Treat images of Buddha as objects of reverence, which is interesting because there's a big hoopla now about graven images, because in Christianity, you're not supposed to worship graven images. And sometimes I think Buddhists get faulted because we tend to be very reverent towards images of the Buddha and Dharma and Sangha. But there's a big difference, I think, between worshiping a graven image and worshiping an image of an enlightened being. As Sharon was saying earlier, visuals can have a very profound effect. And I remember Sarah Rinpoche saying once that even in a fit of anger, if you see an image of the Buddha, that can create a very powerful positive imprint on your mind. And he mentioned the life, I think it was Shariputra, one of the famous disciples of the Buddha, asked how some of the disciples asked the Buddha, how did he get such sharp wisdom? And the Buddha described a story of Shariputra in a previous lifetime. He had been in a rainstorm and he had stopped in a cave and he lit a fire and he was darning his socks. And in the light, in the candle flame or the light of the fire, somebody had painted an image of the previous Buddha on the cave wall. And for a while, Shariputra just sat in serenity, looking at that image of the previous Buddha. And the Buddha said that that one karma became the seed that took Shariputra into his life with the Buddha. It became a cause that he have a life with the Buddha. And then he had a very sharp and lucid mind at the same time because of that lucid admiration of the image on the cave wall. So it's considered very powerful. And so you should treat them with reverence, not as craven images, but as reminders of the body and the speech and the mind of enlightenment. So,
Wilson,
yeah,
when we had a teaching, the teacher, we were talking about, he was talking about how we should revere and honor and all that kind of stuff. And somebody said, is that not, I forgot, worshiping? And he held up his hand and said, not really worshiping. It is actually, you know, paying reverence and elevating them. In other words, it's not just worshiping. Um,
well,
so
words are words. People
yeah,
have, they
unfortunately.
can,
And then we
they can,
go into Tibetan and that's a whole nother world.
yeah, exactly.
But I,
And,
I always try to understand. I have several tankas and I look at them and I also research them. So I try to understand uh, how they're sitting, what they're holding, what's around them, and all that stuff. Um, and meditate a little bit as I do that. So, but they just speak to me a little more than sometimes texts do, and I don't know why that is. So,
there are lots of tales of realized lamas and even, for instance, His Holiness, right before Tibetans lost Tibet to the invading Chinese armies, um, he had images speak to him and let him know what was going to happen and kind of forewarn him. And so there are histories of speaking images that seem to come alive and guide people. Um, so having a healthy connection, whatever word you use for that, whether it's reverence or faith, or if people want to use worship, I'm the only caution is like for a word like worship. Sometimes I've seen that used to translate the Tibetan word "ch," which means offering or
yeah, that's and because I was raised Catholic with a lot of candles and bells, and also I won't go into because of I'm very careful with some words, when I apply it to what I'm doing, that's all. Because
well,
a lot of religions use the word worship, and I don't think it translates exactly across.
well,
Oh,
what I would take out of that word, the way it's often used in the West, is any sense of subservient blind faith, any sense of that,
yes, that's
and
exactly it. Yes, that's exactly
that's not within the Buddhist wheelhouse of what we're talking about. Um, wisdom is considered much better than blind faith. And faith that one comes through wisdom and analysis and careful checking is unshakable. And so that quiet admiration and trust is really closer to what refuge is. Um,
Okay, so I really get better even what the teacher was saying, why he was saying in that teaching, and he clarified it. So that makes sense.
all right, so the next prescriptive one, show respects for writings on the Buddha's teachings. And the third one, always treat members of the Buddhist community with respect. We should treat everybody with respect, but especially, if you see somebody who's devoted their life to practice, they're going to be humble and they're not going to be proud and puffed up. And so, one way to preserve the teachings in the world is for people who understand it to respect it and show that. And that helps uplift it. There are some general precepts for taking refuge by recalling the distinctions of good qualities of the three jewels. Go for refuge again and again and again and again, at least 3 times in the morning and 3 times at night. Um, by recalling the great kindness of the three jewels, strive to invoke them constantly and offer them the first portion of your food and drink. Establish other living beings in this practice by considering them with compassion. I remember one time there was this elderly monk, Nietzsche knows him, Geshe-Dawa. You remember Geshe-Dawa? Nietzsche. His ears were kind of pointing out. He's very humble.
It was beautiful. It looks like that character from Star Wars. What was it called? Obi-Wan Kenobi, maybe a little bit. It was beautiful.
Well, I remember one summer we were in New York City and we were walking down the street with him, and some person, just a New Yorker, came up to him and asked him for refuge right there on the street. And I'll never forget it. He invoked the three jewels and he put his hand on the person's head, and you could feel the good energy just pouring in, and it was just so beautiful. But anyway, he had that ability. He was very. I hope he's still living. He went back to India a while back. So, whatever activity you engage in and whatever your purpose, make offerings and supplications to the three jewels, forsaking other worldly methods. After you have understood the benefits, go for refuge 3 times a day, 3 times at night, and maintain your refuge and do not forsake the three jewels, even in jest or at risk of your life. So, that's the teachings on refuge. Guntang Rinpoche, the third Dalai Lama, the third Gungtang Rinpoche, in one of his poems, he said, um, if you're going to get benefit from taking refuge, you should follow the precepts. If you're in a boat being taken to safety, it won't help you if you don't stay in the boat. He said it basically. That's kind of a not as well as he said it, but that's the general idea. And so when you take refuge, one of the things that comes with it, as I said, you can take vows at that point, but it's good to follow morality because that's what actually saves us. That's the Dharma part that the Buddha said. There's this blessing part that you connect to, and that helps nurture your heart and give you strength and confidence that you're on a path that's good. But the real part that saves you and protects you is following the teachings on what to do and what not to do. In Tibetan, that's called long door. Long is what you take up in your practice, and door is what you leave behind. And at that point, every Westerner I've ever known, when they come to this point and hearing the teachings and practicing, get into, but do I have to give up this? And do I have to give up that? And it reminds me of a friend of mine from another tradition, David Sable, was talking about one of my wife and my early teachers along the way was Trungpa Rinpoche. He was kind of a controversial wild yogi, but I thought he really was the real thing. But David told his story. He was talking about refuge, and he was talking about the difference between Buddhist refuge and Christian refuge. And he said, so if somebody comes to a minister in one of the mainstream churches and says, can I be saved? What they'll get is, yes, you can be saved, you know? And then if the person says, but can I do this and that and this? The minister, no, no, no. Okay. He said, and then Trump said, if you go across the street to a Buddhist temple and you say, can I become enlightened? The teacher will say, yes, yes, you have Buddha nature, you can become enlightened. And if you say, but can I do it? No! There's a little difference in delivery. So in Buddhism, you'll get a lot of the, no, don't do this kind of thing, but it's very out there. And so there are tons of precepts and all that. And the more you know, then the more I think discerning you are as you go through your day in terms of when things come up. You've got a lot of information there on what to accept and what to not go along with.
I tend to think of it as, well, I mean, I think it's important to not consider it prohibitive so much as it is, to go back to terminology, skillful and unskillful, right? So is this a help or a hindrance? Like, you can rationalize all of this stuff. Well, can I do what? Can I have a beer after work or something like that? Well, I can, but what's that going to do? Am I going to meditate afterwards? Probably not. It's just, so when you look at it in terms of, like, the actual effect of it, it's not that you're sinning, or because I am Western from a Christian background. So, the first thing I hear is thou shalt not, this, that, or, but it's
Yeah.
not really a thou shalt not. It's more of a really shouldn't do this because,
It's a little bit of different structure. From the theistic structure, it's like the no-nos that you're not supposed to do are offenses to God,
right.
right? And so you get this sense of an angry God, like you've offended, and then you're going to get punished, right? That's not the sense in Buddhism. In Buddhism, Buddha's going to forgive you whatever you do. They don't hold malice or anger or afflictions. They just love, and they have compassion. They'll get wrathful at times if they think it can protect you from something you're about to do. But that's not with anger or malice. And they're not going to hurt you. They're trying to protect you. That's like a mom yelling at her kid, get out of the street, kind of thing. So it's basically when the Buddha said, be a lamp unto yourselves, what he's talking about is we need to wake up because every moment that we're acting with our body, speech, and mind, we're accumulating karma. And if we continue to accumulate stuff that's going to mess us up, then we're not being very kind to ourselves. And so that's where morality is. It's more like there's a karmic mechanism, if you will, in those 12 links that Sharon was talking about that's infallible. It's
Well,
always
one
been
of
there.
the things that I feel that makes Buddhism different are, so far that I can see, the things you really shouldn't be doing and the things you should be doing. Um, is, well, of course, not harming others, because you're harming yourself anyway if you're harming others. That's just how that works. And yeah, you often feel, well, if you're a decent human being, you're going to feel toxic anyway. So why do you want to do that? But the basic thing is not harming life in any of its forms that's around you, and yet
including yourself.
ourself, but also, animals and the planet and the things that sustain us, and I think that is just, yeah, there's environments and environmentalists, and yes, I love them for what they do, even though they really get extreme sometimes. But they are looking out for human beings,
Yeah.
welfare, and so that's really how I view a lot of the precepts. They don't not make sense to me because I was Catholic and I was given a list there too, of
Well,
things not to do.
His Holiness often says all of the complexity of Buddhist ethics can be simplified into, above all else, don't hurt anyone.
Yeah, be kind and don't hurt anybody. And
And if
yes,
you can, help them.
right,
And so
right,
that,
exactly. So that's how I kind of view and feel about the precepts. And even if I learn new ones, that's what I see. I don't know.
and again, I know I've said some things about Christianity and Buddhism. I don't mean any offense to anybody who's Christian. I think the two traditions actually are quite in harmony, but
Yes, they
it's
are.
practical.
Agreed.
Um, but there are some nuances there that are interesting to think about. And um, anyway, so we're out of time. I didn't get back into the text, but I thought it was good to stay here for a while. I don't know, Bobby, are you feeling any more reassured that there's a way to feel safe in this mess of existence?
Yeah, yeah, it's of course.
I think you probably have better angels looking after you, so between your Christian background and your Buddhist faith, I think you probably have a lot of goodness internally and externally looking after you. So I'll share the screen, and next time I'll get back into the text. But I figured this was an important stop along the way. So, 藏区不给出去买到当瑞拉领先年代跟把地下上给进度没得我也如果能到心啊，就把说一当个路人嘛，安达拉甘尼亚的亚美。Oh, I'm sorry. Going down to the dedication prayer. So we created incredible virtue by just listening and contemplating all this. And so dedicating preserves it so it's not lost. Gyawadi gyawakon sanam yeshe so so chen sanam yeshe lechung we dan bakoni toba sho Ganju Janju Zanjo Rinpoche Ma Ge Ba Nang Ge Gu Chi Ge Ba Nyang Ba Me Ba Yang Gone Gondu Ba Wa Sho Gari Ra We Ko E Sing Gan De Ben Dun Da Wo Ma Lo Jung We Ne Jen Re Zi Wan Den Zeng Ya Zo Yi Xie Be Si De Ba Du Teng Yo Chi. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all.
Thank you,
Have,
Wilson.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Thank
Wilson.
you, Wilson.
sure. Have a good couple of
Bye,
days.
Thanks,
everybody.
Jason. I love taking refuge.
Thank you.
I think he's already got refuge.